Happy Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery. And what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery? Sometimes we have a mystery solved that only leads to more questions, and that's the case with today's episode, which is called Left in the Desert. On July 31st, 1960, a school teacher out hiking with his family found much more than fresh air and exercise. In Sandwash Creek near Congress, Arizona, barely covered in a shallow grave, lay the decomposing body of what appeared to be a female child. She wore red shorts with a blue buttoned blouse with white stripes. Her fingernails and toenails were painted red. Nearby, a pair of men's adult thongs or flip-flops had been cut down to fit her much smaller feet. Ominously, near the shoes was a pocket knife. When the police arrived, they found two sets of footprints. One was believed to have come from the girl, and the other prints were those of a man. In the sand wash, they also found tire tracks, indicating that someone had driven off the road and turned around at that spot. An autopsy would show that they were indeed dealing with a female child, who they estimated to be between 6 and 8 years old. She was about 3 feet 6 inches tall and weighed around 55 pounds with light brown or blonde hair. Her body had also been burned, likely 10 to 14 days before she was found. Due to the condition of her remains, no visual identification, race, or much else could be determined, including the cause of her death. Her case was ruled a homicide, and the coroner's report named her Jane Yavapai Doe, named after the county that she was found in. She would later be known as Little Miss Nobody. Little Miss Nobody's investigation became well known in the area, and soon the FBI was involved. Tips were called in and checked out, and one in particular seemed to stand out as a solid possibility. A little girl by the name of Sharon Lee Gallegos had been kidnapped from Alamogordo, New Mexico, 10 days before the discovery of Little Miss Nobody. The FBI completed a footprint comparison, and they determined that Little Miss's feet and Sharon's were not the same. They also concluded that Little Miss was older than Sharon, and they had different clothing descriptions. Sharon was ruled out as a possible match. Months later, when no leads had panned out and Little Miss's identity was still unknown, local residents in Prescott raised funds and paid for her funeral. It was attended by nearly 70 people. Dr. Charles Franklin Parker officiated the service, and as he closed his eulogy, he said, "We may never know the whys and wherefores, but somewhere, someone is going to be watching the paper to learn what happened to a little girl left in the desert." She was laid to rest in Mountain View Cemetery with her tombstone reading, "Little Miss Nobody. Blessed are the pure in heart." Although she was never forgotten, her case grew cold like so many others do. The Yavapai County Sheriff's Office worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, and produced several composite photos of what Little Miss might look like. In 2014, investigators in Colorado working on an unrelated cold case came across Sharon Lee's kidnapping information. After looking at all the evidence again, they felt that the possibility of this being Little Miss should be explored further. Soon, NCMEC held a fundraiser to have her body exhumed and a DNA profile developed. Unfortunately, tests run at the North Texas Center for Human Identification produced only partial DNA profiles that could not be matched. In 2018, they tried again to produce a full sample, but came up with yet another partial. The two samples were combined and placed into CODIS for reference. Around that time, they also produced another composite drawing. At the end of 2021, a crowdfunding drive ran at DNAsolves.com. They raised all the money needed for another test attempt, and they did it within only 24 hours. This time, Othram Labs would try for a new profile. The lab then took custody of Little Miss and built a genealogical DNA profile. Using that, they were able to identify a sibling of Little Miss Nobody, and that person turned out to be Sharon Lee Gallegos' brother. Little Miss Nobody was indeed Sharon after all. When her family was notified, they were able to fill in most of the details of her last days. Sharon was described by her family as feisty and happy-go-lucky. In 1960, she was living with her grandmother, mother, an aunt and uncle, and 6 other children. Known to them all as La Güera for her fair skin and blonde hair, Sharon loved playing with her cousins. In the weeks leading up to her kidnapping, Sharon may have been being stalked. Neighbors and friends reported seeing a large woman with dirty blonde hair who was in her 30s driving a green 1951 to 1952 Dodge or Plymouth in the area. She had asked questions about Sharon and her family, where they lived, where they worked, and even what the layout of their home was. The day of her abduction, Sharon refused to go to the nearby convenience store, saying she was afraid. As her mother walked with her, Sharon saw the same green car and became so afraid she asked to be carried. Later, at about 3 p.m., Sharon was playing in her backyard near a side alley with 2 other children. Suddenly, a white man with the large woman seen from town, along with 2 other children, one of which was a boy with freckles, pulled up. The woman tried to get Sharon into the car by promising her new clothes and candy, but when she refused, Sharon was grabbed and pulled into the vehicle. Her sister Beatrice heard a scuffle and ran to a window in their home, only to look out and see the car speeding away. My first reaction was to jump in the car and chase them, she said. However, I didn't even know how to drive, so I ran for help. The Gallegos family had no telephone, so she had to run to find help. By the time that help arrived, the car was long gone. Local police set up roadblocks, but found no one. A motive for her abduction could not be found. There was no reason to assume that a large ransom could be taken from the family. Her mother, Lupe, worked at a local motel as a maid to support her children. Lupe actually died in 2011 at the age of 87, never knowing what happened to her daughter, Sharon. Ray Chavez, Sharon's nephew, said that he grew up listening to stories about his feisty little aunt, and she was remembered with love. He said, "Growing up, we didn't talk about it too much as a family. I was probably 12 years old when I finally got the courage to ask my mother about her." Now, his generation tends to be overprotective of their children. Her family has decided to purchase a new tombstone for Sharon's grave, one that lists her true name and date of birth, which was September 6th, 1955. They're still undecided as to whether they should bring her back to New Mexico for burial or continue to let her rest in Arizona. With the mystery of Little Miss Nobody being solved, now Sharon's family, as well as law enforcement, have many questions about Sharon's case that must be answered. Who kidnapped her? And who were the other children in the car? What happened to her after the abduction? How did she die? And can we find justice for Sharon and her family? The Yavapai County Sheriff is asking that if you have any information in Sharon Lee Gallegos' abduction and murder, please contact Cold Case Investigator John Shannon at 928-777-7293. Or you can leave a tip anonymously by calling Yavapai Silent Witness at 1-800-932-3232 and referencing agency case number 1960 or NamUs UPID 10741. Sharon's family had a message for everyone who has worked on Sharon's case. We, as the family, want to say thank you, Ray Chavez said. Thank you for what you've done for us. Thank you for keeping my aunt safe and never forgetting her. Case cracked. I would like to thank newspapers.com, the New York Times, CNN.com, azcentral.com, legacy.com, and DNAsolves.com. Of course, the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case, and here she is now to discuss it with us. Christy, we've covered a few cases this year where an unidentified body is potentially linked to a missing persons case, but then excluded. And here's another one where forensic analysis just didn't do the case justice. I mean, how strong can footprint analysis be when the victim has been burned? And I'm not even clear if it was footprints that they found in the sand or if they took new footprints off her body. But whatever they did, it seemed to fail in this case.
That's very true. I mean, and believe it or not, they have forensic podiatrists. I had no idea. I knew that they analyzed these things, but I didn't realize there was an actual study for it. The International Association for Identification, the same organization we talked about a few episodes ago,
Mm-hmm.
began to recognize forensic podiatry in 2009. It's
Wow.
been a long, yeah, it's been around a long time, I think, but
Well, but
just
I would have imagined
2009.
that that's something like, you know, it sounds like something from a Sherlock Holmes story. Like it sounds like something that should be 100 or 150 years old, but you
Yeah.
know, that they've just recognized it in 2009. That's pretty
Well,
interesting.
and not only that, but a lot of the articles I saw from the mid 2010s
Hmm.
says that due to this type of analysis, they're overturning convictions. Now, you have to keep in mind too that several of the cases involve shoe prints that are found at the scene,
Okay.
and you're not just actually dealing with the person's shoe. They're trying to tell, did the suspect wear this kind of shoe? Is it a, occasionally they'll even have a video and can associate the person's gait and walk with those footprints as well. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah, it's a lot more detailed than I realized.
Yeah. I mean, I guess around a person's ability, like if you have a smaller shoe print at the scene, you know, like a size 10, and the person that you've nailed for the crime is a size 12, then you can get this expert that's like, no, like this guy's foot would literally not fit in that shoe. So
Mhm.
that's kind of interesting. Wow. But here we're talking about an analysis being used at a time when it wasn't even really a recognized method,
Mhm.
apparently. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. And I'm also curious if it was a footprint that they actually got from the scene, like, because they described seeing two sets of footprints at the scene.
Mhm.
What's the possibility that it wasn't little Mrs. Foot? Because if we now know it is Sharon, and we know from Sharon's story there was other children that were in the vehicle. So that
Mhm.
footprint might not be a match for Sharon at all.
I know that was confusing for me. I mean, you like you said, you've got her feet, but she's been burned.
Yeah.
You've got the tracks, but I mean, it's in sand, right? How did that degrade?
Yeah. Yeah. And I
And I
also,
couldn't,
I have to question the logic of the clothing thing not being a
yeah.
match. You know, it's just, do we, I don't know, like, do we assume that no one ever changes clothing?
Well, and I mean, you're dealing with a missing person. You don't know what happens in that time. They're
Right.
more often than not, they don't die as soon as they go missing. So clothes are going to get changed. And especially in an abduction,
Right.
you're going to want to make that person or that child look as different as you can.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Now we also get to some amazing community efforts that really help this case along. Two really big ones. The first one, to give this little girl a proper burial and service. I really appreciate that so many people went to the service.
Hmm.
And then, of course, another. Well, actually, there was three, because there was also a fundraising effort that they did with NCMEC
Hmm.
for the over at UNT for that testing as well. But then there's this amazing thing called DNA Solves. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I thought this was pretty neat too. DNA Solves works directly with law enforcement agencies with one purpose in mind: to aid human identification investigations by combining crowdfunding, volunteer data, and cutting edge genomics to solve unsolvable violent crime cases.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
If you guys are into these type, if you're watching this video, I assume you are already. Go to dnasolves.com and just take a look at the page. It will pull you in,
Hmm.
because they literally, you go there, they have case profiles, they show you the funding, the goal that they're trying to get to, where it's at. You could also look at ones that have already funded. They've got kind of success story ones mixed in there as well. I believe it's actually Othram that runs that website.
Oh,
So
even better.
not a bad business idea to be like, hey, we need funding to help these cases. And honestly, it just shows their intent, that they're really about trying to help these cases. I mean, yes, are they going to get paid for the testing that they do? Yes. I mean, I get that, but they didn't have to take that extra step, put these profiles together, put these fundraisers together, and then of course these things, once they're successful, Othram is, their name is coming up on this channel very, very frequently for the analysis that they do.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, that's definitely one of the companies. It's top tier in terms of this type of analysis. So
Mm.
check out dnasolves.com. I went there. One case in particular grabbed my heart. I'm like, okay, that one. So we actually made a donation to them on one of those cases based off of what happened on today's episode. So
fantastic.
Yeah, Christy, thank you so much for all the hard work and for sharing this with us. We really appreciate you. And I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters Larissa Mertschink, Hillary Green, and Brandy Fry. For over 6 years, we've always run limited commercial ads here on YouTube, and we can't do that without support. If you'd like to help, please visit lordandarts.com. There, you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee like Aura recently did. We know that learning about the mechanisms that help support and find justice in these cases is important to understand the many unsolved cases we also cover, and we really appreciate your support in allowing us to continue doing that. Remember, you can get another Lord and Art story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow, and every Tuesday after that, visit seriouslymysterious.com and subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe below and hit that bell icon if you want to catch one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. And of course, I'll be back with a new unsolved mystery for you on Friday, right here on the Lord and Arts channel.